If women's sexual preferences are liberated and go unchecked, they destroy civilizations. If women are allowed to choose, harems form. If women are allowed a voice in matters that pertain to the safety of a nation, then that nation will die, inevitably. It's as simple as that. Once you realize this, you understand the entire basis behind civilized society. And if not, you'll understand by the end of this video. As this is a complicated subject, let me state briefly what I'm talking about in this video so you can follow along more closely. Women do not, on an instinctual level, care very much about her tribe, nation, or civilization. It's in their nature not to. Women are biological creatures like all others, and they seek to maximize their chances of having viable offspring. This half-century-long experiment of women's liberation and political enfranchisement has ended in disaster for the West. And the damage done to the West may be irreparable, and the only solution would be a return to a more patriarchal society, and this seems highly unlikely. I want you to hold on to this key thought, as the meaning will become clear as this video progresses. When I'm speaking of Western women, I'm talking of women as an organism, or in general. Of course there's a spectrum and every individual is different, but for the purposes of this video, I'll be speaking of Western women and their general characteristics. I realize that this is a sensitive topic and women with children are different from younger women, but it's the broad strokes of Western women that need to be addressed. If you're a woman watching this and take offense to this video, please understand that I do realize that not all women are the same, but there are some very easily identifiable patterns of behavior that need to be discussed. Also key to understand is that every dramatic change that Western women have brought to society has been allowed by Western men. Western women, or for that matter, any group of women, are not consciously seeking to undermine the foundations of any particular society through calculation or deception or for any underlying agenda. It's just that women have never been the builders of any of the larger edifices of civilization and are not and have never been responsible for maintaining them. This is borne out across every civilization throughout history. So to be clear, I am not assigning any quote-unquote blame on any group or gender in this video. I'm only trying to explain how I see the world that we've all inherited. And let's get this out in the open. Women are not very good at being loyal to the tribe. They never have been, they never will be. The reason is it's not in their nature to do so. Women throughout history have shown time and time again they're quick to seek the favors of men they feel are stronger and more dominant, whether they're part of their in-group or not. Recent examples of this, besides Japanese or Vietnamese war brides, come from Europe and are illustrated by the countless numbers of Belgian, French, Dutch, what have you, women that took up relations with occupying German military personnel. And this was only a short time ago, but when Nazis were defeated and social stability was restored, they were punished for their betrayal and transgressions against their people. Now, not only are women not punished for inviting alien and unassimilatable armies of men into the West, they then vote for parties that force the entire society to have its national wealth redistributed to this army of aggressive and hostile men. And women who are in positions of power even openly celebrate the destruction that they bring upon their people and openly taunt those that seek to retain their culture and civilization from obliteration. As in the following video of German politician Dr. Steffi von Berg in Hamburg.
Frau Präsidentin, meine Damen und Herren! Unsere Gesellschaft wird sich ändern. Unsere Stadt wird sich radikal verändern. Ich bin der Auffassung, dass wir in 20, 30 Jahren gar keine ethnischen Mehrheiten mehr haben in unserer Stadt. Das ist das, was wir haben werden in der Zukunft. Und ich sage Ihnen noch ganz deutlich, gerade hier in Richtung rechts, das ist gut so.
And as our societies become ever more dangerous because of people like Ms. von Berg, and even though women can take steps to protect themselves, the primary responsibility for protection will probably always belong to men. This is very important. Women will thus only have as much freedom as their men are willing or capable of guaranteeing them. So the question begs, Why do women do this? Why do women betray their in-group? And how is the current situation different from those that preceded it? Well, in a word, enfranchisement. Women have been given the vote, and in a democratic society, they vote their biological imperative. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, recent genetic research has shown that before the modern era, 80% of women managed to reproduce while only 40% of men did. The obvious conclusion from this is that a few top men had access to multiple women while the bottom 60% of men had no mating prospects at all. Women clearly didn't mind sharing the top man with a dozen other women, ultimately deciding that being one of many women sharing a man who leads was still more preferable than having the undivided attention of a man who serves. Commenting on this, Roy Baumeister, a prominent social psychologist who teaches at Florida State University, had this to say: "It would be shocking if these vastly different reproductive odds for men and women failed to produce some personality differences." He went on, "For women, the optimal thing to do is to go along with the crowd, be nice, play it safe. The odds are good that a man will come along and offer sex and you'll be able to have babies. All that matters is choosing the best offer." We're descended from women who played it safe. For men, the outlook was radically different. If you go along with the crowd and play it safe, the odds are you won't have children. Most men who ever lived did not have any descendants who are alive today. Their lines were dead ends. Hence, it was necessary to take chances, try new things, be creative, explore other possibilities. Many societies, including the West, long ago devised a simple plan to stop the inherent infighting that occurs because a large majority of men in the in-group don't have sexual access to women or the ability to reproduce legitimate children. The entire basis of Western society was the male agreement to keep only one woman in public, so that every male has near equal chance at reproduction. It's for this reason that organized and advanced civilizations have always needed to agree on the equitable distribution of women so as to incentivize its men to produce and have a stake in the society's health and security. But this, like other cultural arrangements that held the West together for centuries, is breaking down, and can be observed in something as basic as the fact there are no Western countries that are even at replacement levels in their birth rates. This again can be laid at the feet of loosening of sexual morality and the dating habits of young women. Colloquially called the 80-20 rule, what it basically means is that the vast majority, the 80%, are sexually pursuing the top 20% of men. This is highly damaging to the formation of monogamous couples and the successful formation of families, and the children that will be the next generation of any given country. And we'll be talking about this more later in the video, but if you're interested, see Google for more information on this. Also, one thing to understand is that female psychology has always been about adaptation. In our tribal past, if women of conquered tribes didn't submit to their new masters, they faced death along with their husbands, brothers, sons, fathers. Even today, many women seek out aggressive men, whether consciously or not, as it seems that this psychology has been ground into women after countless years of our species' evolution. That means criminals, gangsters, and mass murderers are always going to be more attractive to women than hard-working, honest men. They always have been, they always will be. Think of how many women throw themselves at drug dealers versus, for example, math teachers. Sexual attraction is based on this reality for many women, regardless of whether they admit it or not. And the feminization of men in the West, adhering to the repetitive and decades-long diatribe that vilifies anything and all things masculine, are no longer, for many women, attractive potential mates. Especially for women in their critical prime childhood-bearing years. But I do add, this may and does change for many with age. The culture of the sensitive man, the emotional man, the compassionate man, is at odds with what women are biologically predisposed to desire. Young women, if they tell you the truth, are drawn to the scoundrel, not the impeccable gentleman with the perfectly manicured fingernails.
Afraid.
You're trembling.
I'm not trembling.
Because I'm a scoundrel. There aren't enough scoundrels in your life.
I happen to like nice men.
Nice man.
Very nice.
It's so much a part of women's psyche to want the scoundrel. that it's wrapped up in their very DNA. Just to get this out of the way, because I have a feeling it might show up in the comments, yes, I am aware that the vast majority of women, when raped, reach sexual climax or orgasm. However, from all the science that's been done, this is just basically a hardwired response. That if it does have an effect on women and their judgment, it must do so at a very subconscious or primal level. I also know that the number one sexual fantasy disclosed by women over and over again is rape fantasy, forced sex fantasy. But fantasy and reality are two different things. So I'm not really going to count this as a reason why women are so prone to consciously betray their in-group. The half-century-long experiment of women's liberation and political enfranchisement has ended in disaster for the West. When you begin to start connecting the dots, you realize that since women have been given the vote, the entire center of politics and thus Western society has shifted ever more to the left. Women have also used their political enfranchisement to further the cause of the aptly named women's liberation. Liberation socially, liberation financially, liberation from family, from motherhood, liberation from religious dogma, and most importantly, sexual liberation. Once women were given equal say in the sphere of politics, it was only a matter of time until our civilization was swept up by the event horizon of its own collapse. All kinds of studies have been done on this subject, as this one from Columbia University, and they all, without exception, note that as women become more, quote-unquote, emancipated, the decline of the family is further accelerated. And as the family disintegrates and women move politically further and further to the left in their voting, many then begin to use the government as a surrogate husband and provider. Women are thus even more liberated from their traditional roles within the family and society at large. In one of the most comprehensive studies of civilizational decline, J.D. Unwin postulates in his book, Sex and Culture, written in 1934, that the main driver for the rise of a civilization is the degree of chastity of the said civilization's women. Unwin, a British social anthropologist at Oxford and Cambridge universities, studied 86 different cultures through 5,000 years of history and found a positive correlation between the cultural achievement of a people and the sexual restraint they observed. Unwin's impetus for the project was to test the Freudian theory that civilizational progress was the product of repressed sexuality. He found that discipline in sexual matters appropriated social energy to more civilizational ends. It's very complicated, but for Unwin, the fabric of society was primarily sexual, and heterosexual monogamy was the optimal arrangement for the planning, building, protecting, and nurturing of the family. If enough heterosexual partners made a monogamous commitment, civilizational energy was directed toward promoting the finest societal foundation possible. Without exception, each civilization he studied allowed its success to alter its moral code. According to Unwin, after a nation becomes increasingly liberal with regards to its sexual morality, it loses its cohesion, its impetus, and its purpose. From a chaste moral code, societies gain what he called expansive energy, and this energy allowed these cultures to expand into other weaker cultures. Now, when you compare the modern Western world with the Islamic one, you see exactly the results that Unwin's theory would predict. By allowing women to fuck freely, the West has de facto entered a matriarchy that disincentivizes young men. Islam, on the other hand, keeps their women chaste, and their expansive energy, as Unwin's theory predicts, is manifested in what we're observing today. The Islamic culture is the one who's expanding into the West, and it was only recently that the West was able to dominate all other cultures on the planet. Ultimately, each civilization became less cohesive, less aggressive, and less resolute. Civilizations in this liminal phase then collapsed from either A, an internal anarchic revolution, or B, conquest by invaders with greater social energy. Terrifyingly, Unwin also noted that there was no case in any of the studies he'd made in which a culture managed to restrict the sexual freedom of women once they'd been loosened. A feminist society and future is an oxymoron, as it's unsustainable in the long run. Based just on past history, a civilization that embraces feminist values will cease to exist in a very short time. This is why we've never seen a feminist civilization aside from very short spans at the end of great empires. The signs of decline are already observable. While many countries are sliding into social decline, the canary in the coal mine is the self-described humanitarian superpower that pursues a feminist foreign policy. When looking at Sweden, it's one of the most gender-equal countries on earth. And while they've become the rape capital of Europe, they're flushing their culture and country down the toilet and pressing forward in their civilizational suicide at an ever-accelerating pace. The total and complete feminization of Sweden and its men have allowed their women to invite their country's own destruction through the importation of millions of unassimilatable and aggressive people from completely alien cultures. Not only are they borrowing money to fund the colonization of their country, but they are now even creating gender imbalances that will have severe and lasting repercussions on their society's future. And they await their doom with smiles of tolerance and passivity, calm as Hindu cows. Looking again at Unwin's work, he leaves us with a stark dilemma. It may not be possible to save the West. According to his model, this process is irreversible, and the only way to do so would be to restrict the sexual freedom of Western women and move back to a more patriarchal society. And as things stand, this is probably an impossibility. So, instead of having it all, Western women risk losing everything. What are liberal feminists going to do when faced with aggressive gangs of migrants bent on theft and sexual violence? Burn their bras and throw a pocket edition of Cunt, a Declaration of Independence, at them? The violence now being directed toward Western women in their own countries is undeniable proof of the breakdown of the leftist utopian ideals for society. The million migrants that have already arrived and the millions on their way already understand that the West is a toothless civilization ripe for plunder. While Western women might be the ones advocating, whether knowingly or not, for the destruction of the West via misplaced compassion and hyper-emotionalism, it's also the fault of Western men by giving them the choice and allowing their gender's particular predilections to dictate what our civilization's values, priorities, and ultimately what our future should and will be. And maybe Unwin is right. Maybe there is no peaceful way to resolve this crisis of our civilization. Our feminized society hasn't built an equality rainbow that'll usher the West into a nirvana of peace and security based on mutual respect and tolerance. No, it has succeeded in paving the way for the takeover and Islamization of the West. Ironically, it'll be feminine tendencies and policies that rule our society, if not kept in check, that will bring down the more gender-inclusive states of the West and replace them with the tribalism of Africa and the Middle East and the hypermasculinity of Islam. You can have a feminized society, but it won't survive Islam. And here's the crimson red pill of this video. Western men have given Western women freedom of will and choice in their own society. And Western women are now choosing who will take it away from them. If this kind of material resonates with you, a couple of months ago, I made a video entitled Why Women Destroy Civilization. The video has been viewed about 600,000 times since then, and despite the level of rage, bile, and malice heaped upon me as a person by feminists and their enablers, while conspicuously lacking anything that resembles a rebuttal or an argument, the video still has an 81.7% approval rating. It would seem that for many, to broach topics that are uncomfortable or shatter their safe spaces should be forbidden, and for many, reciprocating with malice and spite seems to be their preferred course of redress. But this video is not on why women destroy civilizations, but how women destroy civilizations, using the smoking example of the elections held recently in Austria. There are examples after examples after examples of how and why a majority of women seek to live their lives by going along to get along, and why they, as a gender, are predisposed to do so. If this topic is alien to you, I encourage you to first watch this video in order to better understand the whys to this video's hows. And this brings me to the previously mentioned elections in Austria. Austria's new president, Alexander van der Bellen, who stood as an independent candidate, is a longtime member of the Green Party. Van der Bellen has been known to oppose the concept of the nation-state and is an advocate of EU federalism. And his party is famous for having called their own country shit. And as almost all credentialed Greens, his feminized and motherly political views are on full display as he repeatedly stressed the social duties of Austrians, and by extension Europeans, of their obligation to pay for and integrate tens of thousands of newly arrived non-European migrants. Regardless of the social and criminal chaos they've unleashed upon the country and indeed the continent. He told voters, "I don't want that Austria becomes the first country in Western Europe led by a populist, right-wing, pan-Germanic fraternity member." It would seem as though this is not really even a complication now for the political class, as the president of the unelected executive arm of the European Union, Jean-Claude Juncker, has vowed to block all right-wing populists from power across the continent, shortly after acquiring the power to exert far-reaching sanctions. Juncker already promised in the lead-up to the election in Austria that it would exclude Norbert Hofer, the leader of Austria's Freedom Party, from all EU decision-making if elected. He bellowed, "There will be no debate or dialogue with the far right." When the vote came down to postal ballots, Van der Bellen defeated Hofer by the slimmest of margins. Amid accusations of fraud, one thing is very clear. Without an overwhelming number of women voting for Van der Bellen and the policies of the EU, he would not have become president of Austria. I've said previously, women have played a disproportionate role in the migrant catastrophe that has descended upon Europe. They're more xenophilic than men, more emotional and indulgent, and overrepresented in the ranks of migrant charities and other help groups and the like. Well, Austria has proved this. This graphic shows a breakdown of ballots cast on election day. In this graphic, the male voters are shown in blue and the female voters in red. The more intense the shade, the younger the voter group. As you can see, men mainly voted for Hofer, the Freedom Party candidate, and women, especially young women, mainly voted for Van der Bellen, the leftist. Income status also played a major role on the election. Working class people, shown in the leftmost column, voted overwhelmingly for the right patriotic candidate with a whopping 86%. This is a pattern that you can find elsewhere in Europe as working class people realize that the socialist parties have abandoned them and are embracing their soon-to-be new electoral base. Imported welfare and social benefits dependent migrants from Africa and the Middle East, and, of course, women. Now, I've also made a video on the growing quote-unquote sexual emergencies that Islamic migrants were visiting upon women and children throughout Europe. The video featured a story of an Iraqi migrant to Austria who, like so many others in Europe, kidnapped and sodomized a little boy in a Viennese swimming pool. When questioned, the migrant excused his actions as a sexual emergency. If you're unaware of the scope and scale of the recent uptick in sexual violence by migrants against women and children, I urge you to watch this video here for a more complete understanding of the crimes against native Europeans and how they are not only being aided and abetted by the authorities throughout Europe, but also systematically covered up. Also, this video will provide one with a better understanding of how the flood of migrants from unassimilatable cultures is actually transforming Western Europe into a more hostile and dangerous environment, not only for women and children, but for society as a whole. Now, while crime and the rate of sexual violence is rapidly increasing, again, not only directed toward women, but also children, the women, especially the young women of Austria, have voiced their will loud and clear. They support the policies of those that encourage and embrace the importation of tens of thousands of men that have been shown to increase the risk of sexual violence. And this is on top of the tremendous bill that must be borne by taxpayers of Austria as well as the rest of the West to house, clothe, feed, and maintain this new and gigantic population of essentially unemployable men. The situation with women is that they are highly inclined to conform to social norms. So considering that the media, along with academia, often sets the tone, and for all intents and purposes have been taken over by cultural Marxism, for the most part, women end up adopting these views in order to receive their peers' acceptance. Peer acceptance for many women would seem to trump group and by extension personal security concerns. The funny part is that, and this is just an aside, but if for some reason the far right became the social norm all of a sudden, and this could happen for a host of reasons, from economic contraction to the never-ending Islamic terror unleashed by Muslims in the name of Allah, to unforeseen happenstance, you'd most likely see many more women adopting far-right positions because women generally dread being seen as social pariahs. Ask Ann Coulter. Conversely, men usually are more prone to sticking with a position because they align with it, regardless of social acceptance. Hence, why so many men are aligned with right-wing politics, even when right now it seems like a losing bet, and is vilified by the triumvirate of media, government, and academia. Dispensing with the notions of the cultural incompatibility of the newly arrived migrants, dispensing with the enormous costs upon the host society to provide for people who cannot and probably will never provide for themselves, forgetting about the massive increase in street crime, the fracturing of social cohesion, dispensing with the fact that in many cities now, women and children will have to walk the streets of their formerly peaceful societies with a sense of danger and foreboding unease, the question remains: how many rapes are too many rapes? Obviously, after Cologne, nobody can dispute that there is a serious problem with a large number of the millions of men that have arrived in Europe in terms of what they consider appropriate sexual behavior and how to approach it vis-a-vis European women and children. So much so that the racism of lower expectations has raised its ugly head in Germany, where authorities, while at the same time covering up widespread sexual assaults committed by migrants, are desperately trying to educate Muslim migrants that raping native women and children is not only morally wrong, but just plain wrong. Their countermeasures are classes that teach Muslim migrants techniques to seduce European women that do not involve walking up to them, slapping them in the face, and grabbing them between the legs. And these seduction classes are all paid for and funded by, yeah, that's right, the taxpayer. That being said, the increase in rape and sexual assault when committed by migrants is accepted by feminists, a minority of men, mostly emasculated, and by the majority of women voters in particular, at least in Austria. Europe is literally importing a rape culture via political consent, and the majority of those providing that consent to these policies are women. The question is, how many women and children are to be offered up on the altar of tolerance and diversity? How many child rapes are too many? How many women being raped are too many? How many men being raped will be too many? When will the curbing of social freedoms upon women be too much? How fractured will society allow itself to become? You can have the social policies of the left, the welfare state, a feminized culture wherein everyone takes on the cloth of motherhood, or you can have mass immigration. You cannot have both. The reasons are obvious, but I will list a few of them anyway. There's no reason to assimilate. There's no reason not to form societal cysts within the host country. There's no need to either work or pay taxes if you and your many wives and children can live a reasonably comfortable life on government handouts. This leads to people calling themselves hyphenated Austrians, hyphenated Canadians, or hyphenated British that have no interest in the ideology or culture of their host country that provides for all of their needs. And these social divisions will inevitably lead to conflict and decline. The idea that the West must and has an obligation to mother, pay for, and take care of the entire world is also based on the twin delusions that it will always be affordable to do so indefinitely, and the racism of lower expectations. There are millions of skillless migrants on their way to the West, with the vast majority of them with their hands out. They will, like the millions that have preceded them, most likely become lifelong drains on their hosts' welfare systems, and will probably eventually bring it to its knees. What we've seen through the organized rapes, breakdown of communities, massive uptick in crime, and despite all evidence to the contrary, women still vote for more of the same, so long as their virtue signaling is positively met by the media and their equally ideologically vacuous peers. Sadly, most women, especially the irreligious, unwed, or the young, will line up and spew the ideological drivel of anyone who commands the social narrative, and they'll regurgitate it as their own. But that's not to say that there are not wide swaths of men currently that are also complicit in having a hand in the dismantling of their own societies. Many men raised by women without male role models, young men without the benefit of experience, men that cannot compete with other men and attempt to find shelter in the group embrace of socialism without understanding its ramifications, men that have internalized female characteristics and embrace a worldview that centers around mothering others, or just failed men who hate their society for any number of reasons. Again, as I've said before, outcomes like the recent election in Austria are not only bequeathed by a large number of women and their divorce from reality-based politics, as well as naturalized immigrants, of course, but also men who lack what are considered traditional male values, like independence, self-reliance, having a work ethic, success, competition, excellence, integrity. Socialist and emasculated males generally champion values of dependence, collectivism, government assistance, reliance, not only equality of opportunity, but of outcomes, sameness, preventing hurt feelings by the elimination of success, the elimination of concepts like best or better. The pendulum is beginning to swing back and away from the insanity of postmodernism and its values. And the values that are opposed to the colonization of the West are on the rise. In the end, I don't think that the gender debate will ever be fully reconciled. The reason being is that if we admit that we as men and women are endowed with different traits, strengths, and weaknesses, this would be to admit that we are not the same. This politically incorrect truth may then have the potential to inflict much more damage than our continued charade of faking equality. Look to places like Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan for examples. But the long-term effects of our society's decades-long vacation from even a semblance of reality in our social and political discourse is quickly coming to a head. Reality is not a happy playground, and the fear to intellectualize it, when it affects us on a daily basis, is to cut off our nose to spite our face. We have got to address the hyper-emotionalism that drives our current political discourse. We're now stuck in the political quicksand where virtue signaling automatically overrides rational discourse and what ultimately might be best for society. Any society that is willing to throw out logic and reason in favor of emotionalism and sensationalism deserves to fail and inevitably will fail. And the universe will reteach this lesson as often as it needs to. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, and I'd also like to point you in the direction of the YouTube channel Egyptian Sphinx. He's got some very interesting and colorful commentary on his channel, and I'm sure that you will enjoy it. I was recently in South Korea, and while walking with friends in a night district, I was confronted with a #MeToo feminist march that was piggybacking on the latest in victimhood trends in the US, and the participants, it would seem, sought as much attention as possible as they chose a Saturday night to exclaim their hatred for the patriarchy and demands for a more feminized Korea. And this got me thinking. This video is kindly sponsored by Vikings. I really enjoy real-time strategy games. Command & Conquer 0 Hour was my absolute favorite when I was young. Like those games, I want to introduce you to a very cool mobile game that resembles those top RTS games of yesteryear. Vikings, War of Clans. You can choose your own gameplay style. Are you a diplomat, a builder, a ruthless warrior? The game has amazing graphics and now has 20 million players, which allows for nation-to-nation battles. To support BPS and have a great time, please download Vikings using the links below and get your initial protection shield for free and my special bonus of 200 gold for a fast and successful start. Many would say that the current social paradigm now being enacted in the West rests on the axiom that a feminized society that can and should rid itself of what is generally referred to as toxic masculinity is not only desirable and achievable, but inevitable. However, others feel that with the very recent cultural shift that there is now a continual denigration of the masculine in the public space, and it is not only fueled by the noxious cocktail of academia and the media, but is solidified in the oft-heard mantra emanating from the many disparate groups that seek to dismantle all of the cultural institutions of the West: smash the patriarchy. But is patriarchal society this horrible thing that feminists exclaim it to be, or even a necessarily bad thing? Well, it depends on how you look at it, also on whether it matters to you to have a stable society that has the potential for longevity. But in this video, we will examine patriarchy and how it has been a force for social good in human history, and how it will make a resurgence in the West one way or another. Defining patriarchy in the most simplistic way possible would be a system where males are expendable, females are to be protected, and children are at the center. More broadly, patriarchy is a system where men hold the primary power in society as well as in family life. Men are mostly in control of the political and economic spheres, and they hold the position of leadership within their families. Historically, human civilizations have been created almost exclusively along patriarchal lines for the very simple reason that it works. Conversely, most matriarchal and egalitarian systems were tribal at best. Today, groups that only the most obsessive anthropologist has ever heard of, the Garo, the Bribri, or the Akan, are cited as examples of such systems. Or feminized societies can also arise coincidentally at the very end of a long and bountiful period in the life cycle of a civilization made strong originally by patriarchal principles, such as we are witnessing today in the modern West. I have spoken on this subject before, and it of course proves to be controversial as well as emotional, mostly to a small subset of women and an even smaller subset of feminized men that see any interaction between the genders as a zero-sum game. This video is not for these people, as what you have to understand is that the professionally offended are fanatics. For them, there can be no nuance, there can be no shades. If men and women are not identical, then as their logic flows, there must be one that is superior and one that is inferior. The entire concept of men and women, as they have lived for the past several thousand years in partnership, is completely lost to those that cannot see past their rabid ideological baggage. What is clear, however, is patriarchal societies encourage men to invest in their families and communities. We know clearly that patriarchal societies are successful as those organized around the principles it espouses. Family, fertility, and children are the societies that have come to dominate our planet. The civilizations that are rooted in Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Confucianism, Judaism are all patriarchal. So too are the religious traditions of Sikhism, Shintoism, and Jainism. Even Buddhism, which is packaged for Western audiences as rational, modern, agnostic, and liberal in matters of gender and sexuality, has at its core systematic patriarchal deference, which is traditionally attributed to the Buddha himself. All of these religious and cultural traditions that have been created and nurture the principles within stress the need for female obedience to her husband and, crucially, male responsibility to his family. At the basest level, the health of a tribe or society can really be measured by one thing: its position on natalism. Patriarchy is pronatalism as it is centered around children and promotes human reproduction. Now, any culture that organizes itself around anti-natalism is at very best maladaptive. The principles of child-centered, strong, monogamous, heterosexual families has been the building block of every successful society and civilization. To work in opposition to these values, as modern feminism does, is hence not only maladaptive, but any society that fails to reproduce itself will in time shuffle its way into the dustbin of history and be inevitably overtaken by another group that is pronatal. The modern West is a very good example of this. Europe, currently being led itself by a crop of childless leaders, is a place where fertility rates are below replacement level, meaning more people are dying than being born. The solution to this predicament has been to import people from radically different cultures, which just so happen to be more patriarchal, to have the children Western women refuse to have themselves. What it also means is that the children born to these new arrivals will either be absorbed into the host culture and become less fertile themselves, or patriarchy will be reasserted, and either people will start having children again, or the original society becomes demographically and culturally replaced with people that will. London, Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, and Berlin are only the beginning. In fact, a very good visual that in my mind encapsulates the values of modern feminism and its anti-natal focus was the display put on in Ireland in late May 2018. And when I say display, I do so as I have no other words to describe the joyous celebration by women as abortion was legalized in that country. The photos and videos show women crying in delight and squealing in ecstasy, and the atmosphere was more akin to one of fangirls at a rock concert than simply acknowledging that, despite birth control being legal and readily available, the termination of life can now be had on demand. Now, I do understand that for some Western women, to terminate a pregnancy is, in their minds, a key human right, but I'm not speaking on this. Also, I'm not commenting on the ethics or on the ability to have abortions, either right or wrong, or what even constitutes a child, as these questions are beyond the scope of this video. However, when I was looking at this sea of people and the glee and happiness on their faces, all that struck me was that for all intents and purposes, this was a frenzied celebration of antinatalism and a frenzied celebration of anti-life. And this in a nation that already has a fertility rate below replacement levels. The current push of those that rail against the historical nature of Western civilization as patriarchal advocate for women to abdicate motherhood in favor of career and encourage women to express themselves in sexual ways that mimic men's instinctive reproduction strategies, and then hold slut walks to display their pride at being promiscuous, even though studies have suggested that the more sexual partners a woman has, the more difficult it is for her to create stable relationships later in life. Moreover, there are real and concrete reasons why patriarchal societies have attempted to limit and restrict promiscuity. Historically, without a judicial system that favors women in family law with regards to disposable marriages, a welfare state that can act as a surrogate husband and provider, and of course, the now beloved, celebrated, and cherished ability to terminate pregnancies on demand, promiscuous sex could potentially be catastrophic for women. It was the woman that, minus a husband and provider, that would bear all of the costs of a pregnancy, physically, psychologically, financially, and socially, and none of them to her favor. This is why mate selection was so critical for women and her children's survival. And either way, the currently celebrated emancipation of women from motherhood and matrimony for a life of promiscuity backed up by the courts, funded by the government, and medically assisted via abortion creates a whole host of other problems at the societal level. And to be clear, this does not mean that women or the feminine are to be equated to the values of feminism and antinatalism, but is in fact the value system propounded by those that protest against the gender and sexual constraints placed on a patriarchal society. It's also of note that in the past several decades, many of the women who have embraced feminism have been later in life cratered, disaffected, childless, and alone, owing to their unused wombs. Moreover, since the 1970s, when women were first convinced that career was a better life path than being a mother, well, report after report on the well-being, happiness, and feeling of satisfaction in Europe and North American women has plummeted. Perhaps this is why fewer and fewer women openly identify themselves as feminists. Currently, those pushing for a feminized society mistakenly believe that feminism equates with equality. Moreover, they also mistakenly believe equality means equality of outcome, rather than equality of opportunity, equality before the law, and equal human rights. The poster zer of the feminist movement is currently Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who, via his luxuriant hair and skills as a former substitute drama teacher, beguiled the female vote and famously stated that his cabinet, which he made gender equal despite the fact that elected female MPs only made up 26% of the House, was needed as it was the current year. And in doing so, he demonstrated that equality of outcome is one of the highest virtues of a feminized society. Patriarchal societies have been successful for a host of reasons, including male investment and access to their offspring and the benefits children receive because of it. Society, in turn, is built on the family unit. Patriarchy allows women the freedom to focus on producing and caring for children, and this has and always will benefit a society. Men are more likely to invest in a society that gives them benefits and a direct role of power, as patriarchy does, than they are to invest in a society that marginalizes them and takes away their power. Think on the current Western and Western-only MGTOW phenomenon as evidence. Young men going their own way in their legion are dropping out of society. While there are many reasons for it, central is the rise of feminism and the disincentives that it presents to men. Also, a side note, the situation in Japan and its hikikomori is a very different situation that would require its own video, and that video is in the mail. So, while there is no universal system that has no faults, and yes, women, as stated, should have equality of opportunity, equality before the law, and equal human rights, it is a sad fact that sometimes the desires of the individual are not compatible with the needs of the many to have a stable, functioning society in the long run. And yes, late-stage capitalism and consumerism all play into low fertility rates, but again, those are topics for another video. All that is clear is that in the grander scheme of things, pro-natalism and patriarchy as a system of human organization works, and feminism and antinatalism does not. Now, I'm not saying that a new kind of social organization cannot be found, but thus far patriarchy seems to be the only one that is capable of creating high civilization. Perhaps a middle ground is needed. Some ideas I'll throw out is, of course, that women should continue to have the educational attainment that they already enjoy, and stress on women having a choice in the direction her life takes, but perhaps social shifts that celebrate motherhood, especially in the most fertile years of a woman's life cycle, while discouraging the now celebrated extreme promiscuity exemplified by farcical protest movements like slut walks. Also, the ability of women to reintegrate into the workforce in her post-child-rearing years with ease. while the imbalances in family law being placed on a more even keel, as well as the elimination of government support and handouts for women that make poor choices with their lives, as well as ending abortion as a tool of further reckless sexual behavior or as a family planning option, and only to be used in the most extreme cases of rape, incest, or when danger is imminent to the mother's life. I'm only spitballing here. Please feel free to add your own ideas in the comment section below. Because either way, the extreme antenatal experiment currently underway in the West, which is only a few decades old, will not last forever. Perhaps another half century at most, and a patriarchal order will return one way or another. The problem for our daughters and granddaughters is they might not face the benign pre-1970s Western character of patriarchy, but something altogether different that is more extreme, more restrictive, and profoundly more misogynistic. Only time will tell. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing. Also, please consider visiting my sponsor, Vikings. Links are in the description, and try out the game. I liked it, and I have a feeling you will too. Till next time.